Hey everyone, this is Caps 365. I'm Taryn Bray, joined by Mike Vogel. Another trade deadline has come and gone, and there was a big question mark heading into this year's trade deadline for Washington. What would they do considering how good of a season they've had so far, the chemistry that this team has, and I think those questions were very much answered. They didn't do much, but before the trade deadline, they placed Jacob Vrana on waivers. He was claimed by Nashville, which left subsequently this team without an extra healthy forward. They went out, got a forward, acquired Anthony Beauvillier from the Pittsburgh Penguins. How do you think he fits into this team today? Just one practice, but he was taking line rushes with Nick Dowd and Brandon Duhaime.
And Spencer Carberry talked about that after practice, mentioning that he thought that given the way that Dowd and Duhaime work together, how well they adhere to the system, and how much they talk between shifts and during shifts on the ice, off the ice, he thought that putting Beauvillier with those two guys was probably his quickest entree into what the Washington Capitals are all about. It's really hard to jump into a team, game 64, I think, tomorrow, 63, whatever it's going to be, and be effective. I will say this, Beauvillier's moved around a fair amount the last couple of years, and this after being a fixture in New York with the Islanders for about 7 seasons to start his career. So I think he's probably got a little bit of a better window of how to go about that than he had, say, at this time 2 years ago.
Right.
And for me, he's a pretty consistent player. If you look at his career arc, he's pretty dependable, pretty reliable as far as what he gives you production-wise. You're going to look for somewhere between 15 and 18 goals and probably 35 to 40 points. He's that's Lars Eller-esque type production. The difference is he could play either wing, and he can even play center a little bit. I looked at some old scouting reports from his draft year 2015. He was seen as a center in those days. But I like his game. I like the way he forechecks, the way he competes. He's got decent enough wheels. He gets around the ice well. And he had a couple good playoff runs with the Islanders. I think he's going to be a good fit here. If you look at, I think his eventual landing spot is probably going to be on the Lars Eller line. Okay. And Spencer Carberry mentioned that the two of them had played together a decent amount, like 40 minutes together in Pittsburgh. That may not sound like a lot, but when you remember that Lars was traded here in like the second week of November, that's not a lot of time. And the Penguins are been a fairly revolving door through much of the season because of acquisitions, guys coming up and down, and injuries and whatnot. So, I think for me, Taryn, if you look at that whole, that's been the one thing about this team this year that you could say needs a little fixing. You think about all the guys that played on that line at some point or another. Ivan Miroshnichenko, Hendrix Lapierre, Jacob Vrana, even Mike Scarbosa for a little bit really early in the season. So they've been trying to find a solution, and it's not unsimilar to 2018 when they needed a defenseman to play alongside John Carlson, and they tried a number of different guys all season, didn't really like the looks of any of them. All of a sudden they make what looks like a really minor deal at the trade deadline for a guy. They actually traded for 2 defensemen. Michael Kempney's the guy who worked out. Caps win the Cup. Kempney gets a 4-year contract. Everyone was happy. So this is similar to that. I'm not saying that the result's going to be the same, but to me this is similar to that. I think they've done a good job of this is the area that we want to improve. We don't want to upset the apple cart inside the room. We don't want to trade anyone away, take a guy out of the room. We'll just try to add a little something that might fix this one area that's been a little problematic during the season and see how it works out.
What did you take away from General Manager Chris Patrick's media availability last night? He spoke to all of you guys. What was the key thing that you took away and their approach to this year's deadline?
I think it was when he was asked, kind of what you just asked in the previous question, like what else could they have done, or what else were they in on? And Chris said, well, we were at least discussing things that were bigger. Mm-hmm. The problem was these other teams wanted these really good prospects that we've accumulated over the last couple of years. If you think about it, the Caps farm system has climbed from probably 29th, 28th, 30th in the league, maybe 2-3 years ago, to top 10 or so right now. So teams are calling, you're asking about their players, and they want Ryan Leonard, or they want Andrew Crystal, or Hendrix Lapierre, or Ivan Moroznishenko. And I admire the backing off on that. I don't think it's worth it to give up on those kids yet at this stage of the season. So at this stage of their careers, I should say. So I think it was heartening for me just to hear that. It just confirms we think these guys are going to be good players. But when you start hearing it from your peers, Chris, then I think you realize, yeah, we got a pretty good stable of young up and coming players here.
Yeah.
So let's just hold on to that. Let's see where we go this year. We still got outside of a couple of guys who are still really effective in Alex Ovechkin and John Carlson, who are getting up there in years. The rest of this team is pretty young. Who's to say they couldn't do this again next year?
Obviously, a name you mentioned that is on the lips of everyone, Ryan Leonard. He's having a career year up at Boston College, and the organization, fans, everyone's excited about him. Is the expectation that he will join this team after his season ends a fair assessment, and is that something that Chris Patrick took into consideration as a late trade deadline acquisition when they're considering all the other moves that they could have potentially made?
Yeah, I think you can look at it that way. I think they were looking at potentially Sonny Milano coming back in that light as well, and that's not going to happen. Sonny had a setback, and he's going to be put on the shelf for the rest of the season, it sounds like. So you were short, and then you lose Jake on waivers too. But I think, yeah, all season long, they know that they want to try to have Ryan come to leave BC, turn pro, and potentially jump right into the Washington lineup, a la Tom Wilson back in 2012. Although Tom had a stop off in Hershey, that would not be the case with Ryan this year. And so you got to leave a little bit of cap space. So Don Fishman's had that in the back of his head really since September, that we're going to make a run at Ryan Leonard when the season's over, when the NCAA season's over. So got to keep that cap space, and you've got to keep not just the entry level salary cap. You got to make sure you got his bonuses covered as well. So it's you look at it and say, oh, entry level guy only makes $1 million. Well, those guys also have bonuses in their contracts, and so you got to allow for that. You can't just say, well, he's not going to hit him.
Right.
This is way over my head, by the way, but Don, luckily, understands all of it quite well. So, that's another guy that could come in here and alter the complexion of things. But, again, that's probably going to be, we got to see how the BC season plays out.
Yeah.
I think that Frozen Four weekend is somewhere around April 12th-ish.
Yep.
So that would probably, if that is how it plays out, if he leaves, signs, turns pro, he'd have an opportunity to play potentially a couple of late season, regular season games before the playoffs get underway.
Feels like after the trade deadline is kind of a new season-ish because all these moves are made. A lot of big moves made out in the West, some also in the East. So excited and curious to see how it all shakes out for these last 20 or so games of the season. So thank you so much, folks.
Always good to be here. Thanks.